Welcome to the Film Board, the movie conversation podcast reviewing the latest releases that you've seen and want to talk about. My name is Andy Nelson, host of the Next Reel Film podcast. On this episode, we're succumbing to mind control in the Red Room. It's the latest installment in the MCU, Kate Shortland's Black Widow.
You don't know everything about me. I've lived a lot of lives. Before I was an Avenger. Before I got this family. I made mistakes choosing between what the world wants you to be and who you are. We have to go back to where it all started.
Where did you think I was all this time?
We have unfinished business.
My girls are the toughest girls in the world.
I'm sorry. We had our orders and we played our rules.
It wasn't real.
It was real to me. To me, you were everything.
Bring her home.
Put your seatbelts on. She's such a mom.
It is a full house on the Film Board today. First off, Kyle Olson from the Marvel Movie Minute.
That's me.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
I know you're still buried in Iron Man 2,
Yeah.
which will be actually great for this conversation since that's the first appearance of Black Widow,
Very
and
true.
now you can finally close that loop, as it were. Matthew Fox is here from the Superhero Ethics Podcast. Hey, Matthew.
Hey, really glad to be back.
And we have Jordan Peterson in the house. Hello again.
Hello.
And CJ Lindsay is also here. Hello, CJ.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Last but not least, we have Craig Price from Matinee Heroes. Welcome, Craig.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Like I said, it is a full house of people here who hopefully are excited to be here talking about Black Widow, the latest in the MCU. After 11 years, Black Widow finally has her own movie. So let's start talking. Let's go around the circle, get our initial thoughts of this film, and see what everybody kind of, just on the surface level, what'd you think? Kyle, let's start with you.
A little bittersweet because, like you're saying, it took so long to get here, and now it's done that it seems like for a founding member of the Avengers to now get the thing after dying, finally get her own movie. It seems like way overdue. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. My main complaint, I guess, is that it's exactly what I expected it to be, but what I expected it to be was good. So it's a weird thing. I guess when you get spoiled by a certain amount of Marvelness, and when you get exactly what Marvel does in exactly the Marvel way, you kind of go, yes, but should there have been more? I don't know. I guess we'll find out today.
That's right. All right, Matthew, what about you? Initial thoughts?
So for me, this movie had taken on a very kind of special prominence because I'm very enmeshed with a lot of Marvel communities. And like when the pandemic got started, this was the movie that like, okay, in a couple weeks, things will pass. We'll get to see it. And then there kept being like, Disney would never just do like, we have no idea what we're going to do. They kept saying like, okay, we're going to show it in the summer. Okay, things are the fall, the winter. They pushed it back like 5 times. So just getting to see it, I mean, it just felt like okay, this is one more like a little bit things back to normal. And with everything else, of course, still going on, but like, it just was so good to have a Marvel movie again. I also think so good to finally get Black Widow and the movie that the character should have had, as we said, so many years ago. Beyond that, though, I think kind of like Kyle, like, I thought it was okay. I thought it was fine. But honestly, when the whole movie is about like people undoing the things that they've learned of brainwashing and things like that, once I saw it was, we're going to spray a red mist instead of like actual like people I was like, okay, this is lazy. This is not the movie I wanted. So I was mixed, but then like the family dynamics were great. The action was great. It was a fine movie.
Fine movie. Jordan, let's get your thoughts on this one.
I was really tempted to kind of troll a little bit and just say, loved it. and then stop talking. But that would be so far outside of character for me. I don't think I'm physically capable of that kind of response. I did like it a lot. I really, really liked it. It is it's one of the first, I think this is the first movie I saw in the theaters where there weren't like attendance caps. Live in Los Angeles, and a couple weeks ago, COVID officially ended. According to the powers that be. And so the theater said, all right, we can fill all the seats now. And so there were literally people to my right and left. It was a full house, which was a really awesome experience. And there was one guy next to me who just I think had the exact same experience I did. And it was just delightful to just listen to him just, wailing and laughter. And it was fantastic. It was just a lot of fun. So yeah, I went in with relatively low expectations. And was extremely pleased. And I think there's a ton to love about this movie. And I was also, one last thought is that there I think justifiably some comments about philosophically, ethically, yes, we should have had a Black Widow movie much earlier. But ScarJo is not the best actress in the world. So I'm glad she got a lot of practice being Black Widow before we got a Black Widow movie. I think she did about as well as I've ever seen her do in this movie. And so I think we have a little bit of credit, for the wait. We can credit the wait a little bit for that.
Did all of you see this in the theater, or did any of you watch it on Disney Plus Premium?
I did watch it on Disney Plus. My partner was not feeling well, so I did the stay up till 2 a.m. my time, press play the minute that it got started.
Yeah, I saw it in the theater, and it was weird. I bought my tickets at a point when the theater was still limiting how many people would be seated. And then when I went to show up at the theater, there was somebody at the door saying, "Did you get your tickets before all of this?" And they actually had moved us. I was like, oh, that was strange. Luckily, it didn't end up being a horrible move to terrible seats or anything like that. But still, I'm that was a strange thing to kind of walk into.
That's exactly what happened to me. There's people at the door with a clipboard saying, "Oh, right. Actually, you bought these seats, but you don't actually have those seats. You have these ones." And I had taken a friend who had not been to a movie since before COVID, and he got kind of nervous because originally there was, when I bought the seats for him, it was him and his daughter, and then a space on either side. And now, nope, shoulder to shoulder. And he got a little nervous about that.
Yeah, it was full.
And I think that's California, because I saw In the Heights was the first movie I've seen in the theaters. And I saw that, I think, 2 weeks ago or so. And I think there was there were some empty seats. It wasn't sold out, but we definitely were there wasn't any forced distancing by the theater. And this is Minnesota. So I know California's been a lot stricter about that.
Yeah. And Phoenix has not. So
Really?
We don't have rules here in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
The Wild West. West. All right, CJ, let's get your initial thoughts on this one.
Well, first of all, I will attest that the person that Jordan was sitting next to had the exact same reactions. They were laughing. There was a moment where they were the only two people laughing in the entire theater. And they just kept laughing. They were kind of fueling each other. It was great. I didn't get to sit right next to him. I was 3 seats to his right, but it was great. My feelings on the movie were similar to kind of a lot of first solo MCU movies, which is that it was incredibly entertaining. I had a really good time. The casting is perfect. The comedy chops of the movie were fantastic. Those were my kind of favorite moments. All of that said, there were some significant, I think, some missed opportunities that they probably could have tightened up a little bit. But for the most part, the net outcome of my experience was positive, with some comic book fan gripes, because I wouldn't be a comic book fan if I didn't have gripes.
So we'll get there.
We'll get there. Craig, how about you?
Well, I saw it at the Irvine Spectrum IMAX. So people were cheering the IMAX logo. That's how excited they were. And I think all the delays really worked in Disney's favor. As we will find out, it looks like it's going to make them $100 million this weekend. And that's why they postponed it, because this is a movie that people need to see in the movies theater. But also it's a situation where everybody is just so excited to get out that they're going, even if they weren't going to go see this one or they had the option to see it at home, I think they're still going to go out because they can. I think I'm going to go to a Comic-Con next week, and that's going to be full because I think it's just people are so desperate to be out doing stuff. So Disney was pretty smart to delay this because I think the money will show that. I thought it was great. I think it also has the benefit of being the first Marvel movie out after COVID. And so people, even if they have high expectations, have had a drought. Mm-hmm. So they're just happy to be drinking at the well. And so they're going to be probably a little more high on it than normal or more critical. But I think it's a good, solid outing. It's a little more snarky than funny. I wouldn't call it very funny. I think the funniest part is David Harbour, and he's being an idiot. But I think but everything else is just mostly Florence Pugh just kind of being a little snarky once in a while. It wasn't laugh riot, which is not a kind of movie, but it's a very solid entry and definitely worth the money.
Yeah, I think that they did a really good job with this, and I enjoy Scarlett Johansson's portrayal of this character over the years. I think that she's clearly kind of grown into the role. And I had a lot of fun with kind of the world they created here. I enjoyed the way that this story unfolded. I enjoyed that they created this really strong story about all these really strong female, characters. I thought that was actually pretty interesting. And so I had a great time. My family and I, we really enjoyed it. I certainly have my issues too. And let's start digging into this a little bit. The film starts off in Ohio in 1995. And so I want to kind of talk about the setup that we're walking into here, because I think that there are some interesting elements here in kind of how our perceptions of what we're walking into as we meet this family and kind of get to know these people before all of a sudden, they're actually all Russian spies, which is a very interesting way to set up the film. And but my first question is, when you were in 1995, did you know any youths who had blue hair? And do you think that's an effective strategy for a Russian spy hiding in 1995 to stand out by dyeing your hair blue?
I went to a super progressive high school in New York City, and there was the one girl who was the goth girl in school, and she did have blue hair, and she was an absolute standout. Everyone talked about her in this super progressive school in a super progressive city. Yeah, that in suburbia, I was like, it's cute. Come on.
No, the question is, were you talking about her parents? Because the parents were the spies and the kids were not. So it doesn't matter what the kids are doing. So, yes, if there's a kid with blue hair, big deal. If mom's got blue hair, now you've got a problem.
Although clearly Natasha knew kind of what was going on. Like, she was in the loop of like, we're actually from Russia and all this sort of thing. So she may not have been one of the spies, but she certainly was hiding things. And so I thought it was just a very funny setup that like, this is how we're setting the whole thing up. She's so cool. She has blue hair in 1995. I thought that was a little bit of a stretch, but it's an easy thing to forgive. Regardless, let's talk about kind of this whole idea of, setting up a family. We meet them as family, which I thought was a little bit of a surprise. Kyle, how did that play for you?
Yeah, I liked it because I didn't know exactly where we were, what was going on. It was nice to be disoriented in a spy thriller right at the start. I was thinking, are we about to find out that Natasha was actually kidnapped? Like, this was her normal life, and then she's taken from them? And then as they slowly reveal, as everyone sort of gathers together, and of course we've all seen the preview, so we know who they all are, you start to go, they're doing the Americans. Like, they're doing a riff on, the Russian spies living in suburbia thing. I was really, I kind of enjoyed that so much. I kind of wish there had been more of that, but I know we need to see ScarJo. We need to get the stuff rolling, but they built such a nice little domestic thing in there, that when everything kind of went crazy, but I think they did an effective job because then what it is that especially Florence Pugh's character, Yelena, is arcing back to, because you got to see that a little bit of what that family unit, as opposed to starting it right from them jumping in the car and driving away.
I thought that was an important point, certainly worth bringing up, the fact that, it becomes so critical, the idea of this family being a real family. As you said, for Yelena, it is a critical part of her youth that she always thought it was real, and all these other people are saying, we faked the whole thing. And until Natasha later reveals, no, there was actually, I did get more out of that. And I found that to be a strong point of that. Jordan, did you have any reactions to how that all played off?
I think that the whole family dynamic thing, I mean, really was the emotional core of the movie, and it was, to me, shockingly successful. I was that's the thing that surprised me the most. Like, I expect at this point Marvel to be really good at action scenes. I expect them to be really good at comedy and, like, you know, keeping things just light enough that you know that you're here to have a good time, and, you know, really good spectacle and generally speaking, really good casting. But a lot of the time, the emotional core is just sort of like maybe competent at best. And this one, I felt like it was one of the more affecting stories about, like, with character arcs, with relationships that I'd seen from Marvel in a really long time. And so I was, in general, very, very impressed. It was effective for me from pretty much the get-go. Blue hair didn't bother me. I did find myself questioning a little bit. I was like, 1995. But in general, like, I felt like the aesthetic was really was profoundly effective. And the way that, I mean, you feel so sort of bought into that story and those people so early that really carries through, like, every scene that they reappear. And I never felt like that was ever betrayed. I felt like all of the reveals, all the twists, all the challenges, that they were all very well earned. So that by the end, I cared very, very much, about how those relationships were going to go, which I think is actually, I'm just going to go one step further and say it's fantastic as an origin story for Florence Pugh's character, because now we know we're going to see her, and I'm thrilled to death, not only because she's a fantastic actress, but because, like, she's got this really solid emotional backstory, and that's wonderful. So I'm, very, very happy with that.
And I just want to make sure that we do understand Ever Anderson, who plays young Natasha, she rocks that blue hair. Let's be clear. She looks fantastic.
Amen.
Hallelujah. So, I mean, it's a really interesting beginning because of the way that it sets up this story about family. And I think that it does become such a critical part of the film. And then we take a really, it was so effective, the way that it went so quickly from this wholesome family and all this sort of stuff to all of a sudden, now we're on the run. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now it's going to be one of these stories where it's a family on the run. Then they're speaking Russian. Then the kids are taking guns and kicking butt. And so it turned into something much different than what we had been getting. And then we shift into the kids getting injections in the neck and our opening credit sequence with what seems to be like a young girl smuggling ring, which was just kind of horrifying. And it was something I was like, this is kind of like DC territory. Like, this is really dark stuff that we're all of a sudden jumping into, which was a big surprise because I did feel still that this was a family. I didn't realize it really was not a family at all. How did that all play for you, Craig?
Well, it's Black Widow. Her backstory is not pleasant. And like the main villain, the general says, the world's largest resource is being exploited, and that's women. He said that right out. So that is exactly what's going on. It is a brave move for Marvel, but not for movies in general. I thought it fit exactly the backstory of the Red Room and specifically Black Widow. So, I liked it when we had the Femme Force 5 kicking butt at the beginning. It's like they're up in Morocco with their guns, wearing black, which is not the greatest thing to do as someone from Phoenix, you probably know, Kyle, you're not out there rocking black leather. You'll die. But I thought they used that without it being overly played. And nowadays you get so many toxic fanboys who are upset about Taskmaster. Never mind that the entire movie is a female uplifting story for every girl that's in there. My wife was so excited to watch this movie, and she loved every second of it because finally every single person who is of value, who has something to do, is just a female. It's not even a big deal. Like I said, they don't make a big deal of it, except the fact that it just happens to be all women. The security guards are all women. The assassins are all women. Everybody is just playing a woman would have a normal a man would have. So it wasn't a big deal. I don't think they overplayed it. I think they balanced it out perfectly. And quite frankly, there's still going to be a lot of whining about Taskmaster.
I think it was very intentional on exactly what you're saying, Craig, that the movie kind of addressed two of the things that have often been critiqued, particularly about Black Widow, as being not great from a feminist perspective. One was just the, like, you know, in Iron Man, they showed her, like, you know, the hair-flipping sex kitten, and they completely made fun of that with this great running gag.
Well, that was a real thing.
Of Yelena. Yeah, like, I thought it was so good. But also, like, and that was a great joke, but also a good callback. But also, you know, Age of Ultron, when, you know, Natasha says, "Oh, I'm just like you. I'm a terrible monster because I can't have children." Like, there was a lot of, I think, very justifiable anger about that. And so having a scene where both her and Yelena get to talk about what happened to them in terms of the non-consensual forced hysterectomies in much more serious ways, and seeing a man be like, "Oh, I don't want to hear about it," and them like being, "No, you have to hear about that." That felt to me like they really that was very intentionally like, we listened to what was wrong with Ultron. We want to make sure we give that part of Natasha's story a much better reading. And I just thought that was fantastic.
I had read that the director, Kate Shortland, had brought in Nicole Holofcener to actually do some uncredited rewrites on that particular scene to actually kind of really address those issues that had come up in Ultron, and this whole idea of, oh, you have been sterilized, you're a monster, like that whole thing, and finding a way to kind of approach it in a way that just made them say it was something that happened, but we're not monsters because of that, you know. And so I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of address that particular scene, and in context of the Red Room and everything else, I thought actually it was a really interesting seeing the way it was played out. And I loved, personally, I loved the way how David Harbour's, as Alexei, his reaction to them was like, "Oh, is it your time of month?" Like all of that sort of stuff. Like that played exactly to like how dumb men react to things like this. And so for me, it was an incredibly effective scene. And for me, it was kind of a surprising moment to actually have in here. CJ, did you have any thoughts on how all of that played out in this film?
Yeah, it was actually one of the things that when I thought about a Black Widow kind of solo movie, my first thought as a comic fan was like, that's the Marvel, they might have to go dark. Like there's some brutal stuff in kind of the backstory there. And bringing in characters like Taskmaster, and I knew they'd change some things, but I kind of wondered how they would handle all of that. And the opening credits with the hauntingly beautiful kind of feeling of the montage and everything that we saw. It was like all really dark stuff, and we felt it there for a moment. But then they did really well about like making it a joke, right? Like what they're talking about is pretty dark, but Florence Pugh just kind of makes a joke out of it, like, get all up in there, and they just kind of, right, and it's like, haha, funny, but like kind of not though. And I wondered how Marvel was going to balance that, and I wondered if it was going to work. I wondered if they would ignore it entirely. You know, they've touched on it here or there in various Avengers movies, but I thought that the way that they decided to go about it, to address the darkness in a way that didn't feel dark, was great. It still felt real. It felt like the stakes were there and the stakes were true, and we, like, the Red Room is very softened and how it is portrayed in the comics a lot of the times, but it still works. You still know what it is. You're still very much there. It didn't take anything away from it. They rode that line. It was a very thin line that they rode, I think, very well.
I think it was a really smart choice to use gallows humor to get into the really, really, really dark stuff, because it allows you to not cheapen the stuff by like pulling punches, but it also keeps it from being so heavy that it like drains the spirit out of the scene, out of the movie. And it also I think it feels really authentic. Like when it comes to like the worst things that people deal with, like when you have enough distance from like horrible trauma, like one of the probably most common reactions or ways to sort of deal with that in the long term is with like really dark humor about it. It's like that's the way that we sort of adapt as human beings. And so I think it's a really actually pretty miraculous adaptation for human beings to do that. And so it felt very appropriate, as well as being, you know, sue me, entertaining, like, you know, to be able to kind of like get into that horrible stuff with like something that felt like authentic, but also still like I really like these characters. I want to hang out with them. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's a tough line to walk. And I think that they did it pretty successfully. There's been a few people bringing up some points relating to the comics and its origins here as far as Taskmaster, the Red Room. Let's talk a little bit about the adaptation. And I don't know how many of you are versed in the Black Widow lore in the comics, but I'd love to hear thoughts from any of you who have read those stories. How did you think? You mentioned it. They softened the Red Room a little bit, CJ, and obviously there's Taskmaster things. What are general thoughts of the adaptation in bringing this to the screen?
So, admittedly, I am more of a DC Comics reader than I am a Marvel reader. As you can see with the wall behind me, there's not a single Marvel thing up there, or my T-shirt, which is Batman. That being said, I have read more Taskmaster comics than I have Black Widow comics, and so I'll speak primarily to that. I get the gripes. I am aware of the changes that they made. But, Taskmaster 1 being male and changing it to female. And, there's like deep cuts there's a Deadpool comic where she was a female at one point and all that, but primarily it was a male. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with they take the amnesia part of his character where he doesn't totally remember all of where he came from. And as he absorbs more kind of muscle memory, which is kind of his main power, that the non-muscle memory parts of his life goes out of his memory. So it's kind of this perpetual amnesia in his life. And changing that to what seemed like they were changing it to mind control, and kind of playing that as kind of the same thing. I'm fine with all the changes. There was missed opportunity, and that's probably the biggest part. When I said in the opening that there was missed opportunity, it was with Taskmaster. I love the character, but I was honestly okay because of the story that we needed to see. It was not necessarily Taskmaster's story that we needed to watch. And so they made the changes to better illustrate a Black Widow and family story. And so I was okay with it. And I think that I could have used some more muscle memory mimicking. There was some in there, and we got a little Black Panther kind of moment that was cool. But that's like a really cool power, and to see it on a big screen, I think that there could have been a little more opportunity to see some muscle memory and some copying, and maybe referencing some older movies where if there was footage of superheroes fighting, she turns into Captain America or turns into, what I mean? That could have been really cool. So there was missed opportunities, but the changes that were made, I was frankly okay with.
Yeah, I agree with you on all that. I sort of am of a divided mind. Like there's my movie fanboy and my comic book fanboy are sort of at war. So movie wise, I think it worked. I think having it be Dreykov's daughter, which was a callback all the way back to the first Avengers movie, and fit thematically, and it's yet another victim of what the Red Room was doing. All that worked. But then at the same time, I have the same problem with this version of Taskmaster as I do with Hawkeye, because the Hawkeye that's in the MCU is not the Hawkeye from the comics. And while Jeremy Renner's portrayal is interesting, I sort of then also mourn seeing the Clint that I read for 30 years or whatever. I'm like, oh, I like that guy. Like when they bring the series out, I have high hopes, but it's not going to be the Matt Fraction David Aja run because he's so different as a character. And so that's sort of what I mourn a little bit is like, I don't mind it that it's a new character that's also called Taskmaster, but then that means that we're not going to get the Taskmaster that I was really hoping that would be able to stand toe to toe with any of the Avengers, and because they can do anything that they can do and you can't stop them. Yeah, it's like now we have a person who's totally different, who has a similar set of powers, who now is a silent person working along this other new group that's gone off in the way. Okay, once again, cinematically worked perfectly, but fanboy wise, I kind of it makes me a little bit sad.
Yeah, I also personally just felt bad for Olga Kurylenko, who I love seeing her on the screen, and I was like, I wonder how much she actually got to be in the film and on the set. Was it just the 2 times they took the helmet off? Was that it? because that wasn't a lot of screen time.
Well, they were probably strapped for cash. They couldn't quite afford to have her on set, more often.
Right. No, it was a really interesting character, though, and I really enjoyed the way that Taskmaster did play out in the course of the film. And yeah, I mean, I'm not as familiar with Taskmaster from the comics, so it didn't bother me that I figured that they had made some big changes like they did. It didn't really bug me, and in fact, I actually really liked the way that they modified the character to be this female character, daughter of Dreykov. Is a really interesting kind of twist and kind of an interesting surprise. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of the villains of the film. We've got Dreykov as kind of the head of the Red Room. This is Ray Winstone's character. And then, of course, Taskmaster, played by Olga Kurylenko. Let's talk a little bit about the villains. How did they work for all of you as far as kind of this pair, the Red Room, the Russians, all of this side of things? Craig, what did you think?
It's Ray Winstone. Of course it's great. I mean, he's perfect. I kind of feel like they didn't play up the Howard Hughes aspect of him as much. I mean, they had these little glimpses. They showed his fingernails. They showed all the food service. He's got room service trays in front of his door. You'd think there'd be someone picking that up. Just me. If you're going to live this whole thing. I always find it a little ridiculous when you have a floating city and they say that no one can find you because you're above radar. But the heat signature alone is going to be massive.
That's not how it works.
Yeah. I think I've heard the word satellite mentioned once or twice in the MCU.
But he played a great villain because it's Ray Winstone. His motivations are always a little weird, but the MCU's villains are always that way. They always have like one that's just a little bit off that doesn't make any sense to anybody besides the person who's portraying them. I mean, he has everything in the one ring. Come on. But other than that, I mean, he had the fact that he didn't want anybody to know who he was made sense. Her goading him at the end about nobody knows. So are you really real? Do you really exist? I think he wouldn't have cared because he's living in a room by himself for years. He doesn't care if anybody knows. It's the power. He gets off on controlling people. He gets off on controlling and manipulating the world from his literal high ivory tower in the sky. So I loved him as a villain. I just thought that the interactions between him and Black Widow near that end they could have changed that up a little bit. It was a little too easy.
Any other thoughts on that?
When I compare this to other kind of solo MCU films, this is essentially where I'm landing on it, which is this villain, motivations kind of hazy, one-off, dies at the end, seemingly no long-term consequences. Like, this was a character that was playing God and literally built a city above everyone else to watch over them and literally control half of, not all women, but like a whole lot of people, and be able to put his hands in all these things with the opening montage of him with Bill Clinton and him with all these, political leaders. Obviously he's kind of pulling the strings, kind of puppet master. There was some cool stuff, some cool, I don't know, psychology, if you want to, character thinking that you could have gone into. And whether in this film or in future films, but they just don't. They just didn't. And I feel like they've done that with a lot of really good villains in the MCU, where they present this really cool character that you could really get into, but at the end of the movie, they die. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that was it. And the same thing. It's the same thing that happened in this one.
We've talked about how we've kind of been spoiled by some of the newer Marvel movies, because I think this is like just as good as like Captain America the First or Thor. I think in some ways we've also really been spoiled by the Disney Plus shows, and in my case, in many cases, the Netflix MCU shows, in that all the things we're saying about, I liked the family. I really wanted a lot more. I liked that the 95 scene. I wanted so much more. I wanted so much more about the villain. I feel like there were so many new characters and dynamics. I mean, I don't want to get to a world where it's only, 8-episode shows, but I feel like this story in some ways would have been much better without longer treatment. Because there's a lot of things where I just felt like, having both the parents have their face turn, it just all felt so rushed. And like the villain felt like, on some level, I really liked that it was low stakes. I liked that this wasn't someone who's, destroying all of humanity or destroying the world. It was just some guy with a little bit of power. And then he said that stupid line about, I can make economies fall. And it's like, okay, well, that's Marvel being dumb. But like, I like the small stakes. But I felt like there was so much more, as the other people were saying, like that I wanted from his character, from the family, from all these things, that I think it really suffered trying to put all that into 2 hours.
Greg, you had a point?
Well, I think the big problem with Marvel is the characters in the script are mediocre, but then they get people like Ray Winstone or Guy Pearce, or they cast so well that the villains exceed expectations. And we want to see more of them, but because if you read it as a script, not knowing who is going to be who, you're like, oh, he's dead. That makes sense. But you get these great actors coming in and really embodying these people, and you want to see more of them, but you can't because the script reads like, oh, he should die. It's no big deal until we see them actually perform. And they've fallen into that trap over and over again, where they just, I guess they have low expectations over who the villain is going to be. And then they get the person in there and they hit home runs, and they don't understand why everyone's upset that all the villains are dying.
It amazes me that Marvel redefined the movie villain with Loki and then never figured out how to do that again. Like you bring in Christopher Eccleston, he's Doctor Who, and you put him into the war, and you give him this horrible makeup, this terrible lines, and then kill him off, and you go, what was the point of bringing Chris? You could have put anybody in to do that. Yeah, they have a bad track record of, and also even with Ultron, like Ultron has his issues, but like James Spader committed to that, like he was all about it, and he's gone forever. What was the point then? Why did you
just don't kill him? That's all. I agree with you 100%, but just don't kill him off.
I think that there's something fundamental, and CJ's heard me get on this soapbox plenty of times, so he'll be rolling his eyes at some point here, I'm sure. But there's something fundamentally limiting about comic book movie adaptations because we're working within a contiguous universe that they're building. There are very, very hard rules about what they can and can't change and do within that universe. It's not a big open sandbox where you can do anything. And I think that actually puts a relatively hard ceiling on how morally complex you can be, on how the stakes can be constructed and executed. And I mean, at the end of the day, there are already way too many characters, way too many powers, way too many storylines, way too many everything. It's a miracle that any of these movies work. And I'm not being like a giant Marvel apologist here. I think that it's both a virtue and a vice. Like it's both a strength and a weakness of these movies. On the one hand, I think they're doing really great work, and I always have a fantastic time. It's very dependable. And on the other hand, like I'm never going to walk out of a Marvel movie expecting to be sort of like, moved and changed in my soul, like because they're operating within these really, really strict marketing essentially boundaries where they've sort of painted themselves into a corner over and over and over again. So it's a miracle when you like the villains at all, I think. And yeah, like when we get to the big floating city, I'm thinking like, this is absurd. Of course it's absurd. It's a comic book movie. Like the red dust that like magically cures your impossible brain control. Like, okay, great. It's a MacGuffin. I get it. It's a comic book movie. But like, and then the fact that like, he's supposedly sitting in his spider web and sending out all his Black Widows to control the world. I'm like, and what have you done with the world? Like, it's pretty mediocre. There's not like what grand plan have you executed? Like, it kind of seems like everything's just rolling forward like usual. Like, I'm not sure like what you've accomplished in all your decades of incredible manipulation. So it's all sort of baked into the fundamental weakness, I think, of this medium. And I'm grateful that Marvel movies exist. I do wish that we could get, $200 million spent on other kinds of movies sometimes, but whatever, like this is what we have. So I think that it ultimately, it always feels to me like a little bit, it feels a little bit wheel spinning to me to talk about like, oh, well, this villain just wasn't quite fleshed out. It's like, well, what are they going to do? I mean, I couldn't do better, and I'm not that I'm like a great writer, but I do know how character and story works, and I've done a lot of this kind of work in the past, and I just don't know what I would do. I'm like, given the constraints that they have, I just don't know. I don't know. And maybe somebody figures it out at some point, but but
yeah.
when are you going to bring him back? You know, like there's already too many.
So I do think there was a big missed opportunity. Like I really hear what you're saying. I think there are some limitations there. I think there is, though, a huge missed opportunity. And there's kind of a red dust point I've been wanting to get into. And I think this is the perfect time for it, because to me, the story that I have always wanted from Natasha is what made her choose to make a face turn. You know, what made her choose to stop being this assassin for the Russians or whoever it was and to start doing the right thing. 10 years ago, I would have loved to see, you know, her and the actor playing Hawkeye, like, play out that story, like, give us the movie at Budapest. This was obviously not going to be that. It's too late. But my hope was that this movie was going to be basically getting to see Yelena go through the same process. And Yelena, you know, having to come to terms in the same way that Natasha did with making that switch. And so to me, once they introduce the red dust, you remove all agency. And to me, agency is what makes characters interesting. And I feel like if they had, like, made the story, especially because then, like, you know, Natasha has this thing about, well, I don't want to commit collateral damage, while breaking out their father figure from prison. They're murdering Russian prison guards with rocket launchers and no one cares. Like, it just seemed like there was so much moral weight they could have gotten into. And I would say, I mean, like, I think movies like Civil War and Black Panther, and they have gone a lot deeper on some of those questions. And to me, I think that was where you would have had to tell a smaller movie, because it would be much more about Natasha and Yelena. But I think if it had really been about Yelena having to decide to do what Natasha did instead of just red dust, to me, that would have been the single biggest change that would have made the movie given a lot more depth in the way I would have loved.
I think that's a really, really good point, and I completely agree. I totally 100% agree. That's basically a perfect summary of, like, probably if there's one giant flaw of this movie, it's that the red dust MacGuffin did kind of delete an entire layer of potential complexity, which I think probably on some level they just weren't prepared to address. Like, there just wasn't that kind of sophistication in the development of the story. But yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, they even, as far as, like, saving all of the other women around the world who are widows, they basically say, here's the one last vial, you know, go make copies of it so we can cure everybody else. I mean, that's basically is what it comes down to. And it does take a lot of that out. Coming back to the whole point about villains and everything, I mean, that is something that I certainly have appreciated in the Spider-Man films, and Spider-Man generally as a character always kind of putting his people in prison largely. Although it certainly hasn't played out in all of the films, but I know it was nice. I thought it was great seeing when we had Michael Keaton in jail at the end of that film. It's nice when they do that and allow for possibilities in the future. And it certainly is something that, I mean, it's in comic books. People are always putting villains away so that they can have them later, right? And so it's something in the films that it has always struck me that they do that so rarely. And in the case of this particular film, especially because with the grand scheming that Dreykov was doing, wouldn't it have been interesting if instead of saying, oh, we're going to finally do the Black Widow solo movie, what if they said, we're finally going to do the Black Widow solo trilogy, and it's going to be 3 films of hers, they could have still squeezed it into that same window of time, and they could have had this big overarching story over 3 films of Dreykov and all of his manipulation, and each of the films could be part of that. But then we have a much more interesting progression for that particular character. Because yes, and
Yelena starts off as an antagonist, and then over the course of time,
wouldn't that be interesting? Because I love Ray Winstone too. I had a little issues sometimes with his accent, but largely he was great.
He was not quite Sean Connery Russian, but he was in that same sort of, like, I'm an English person. I'm not calling Sean Connery English. I'm a British person doing a Russian accent. I kept having this nervous feeling of, like, okay, when are you going to tell us this is all Hydra? Because Hydra's still around. I was so glad that the word Hydra was never spoken. And that it was just like this person doing things.
Yeah, it was brought up.
Once.
Was it?
Yeah, it was once Melina talked about how they stole the information from S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yes, that's right.
But it's actually Hydra. She knew it was Hydra at the time.
Right. Okay, yeah. So like, it exists in the same world as Hydra, but there was just a point in Marvel for a while where everything tied back to Hydra in some way or another, and I did like that it was that. I think, though, I'm a politics nerd. The other thing the Red Guardian's such an interesting character, especially how he keeps holding on to, like, the communism, like the party. the whole thing, the prelude was set in the years right after the Soviet Union fell. Like, there could have also been a really interesting question of, like, he served Soviet Union and then and that would be a totally different direction for it again, but I think that would have been a fun thing. But just having it not be Hydra was one very big positive for me.
Well, and I know, speaking to that, David Harbour has already said how much he loves that character and how he really would love to do a whole thing of like the Red Guardian and kind of the Russian version of the Avengers and kind of do a whole series. He's like, I don't know if, it's not like Kevin Feige's come and talk to me about it or anything, but I love this character and I would totally be there for that, which I think would be fun because, I mean, he is great in this role. And I certainly hope that we get to see him, if it pops up in the Hawkeye storyline as we kind of follow that. I have no idea, but it would be interesting.
Well, we know that there's a superhero arms race for after Captain America. That's been a recurring. That was all of Falcon and Winter Soldier was talking about that and how difficult it was. The Incredible Hulk is all about that. I mean, it's like chasing his thing. So how does he have powers? How did Russia have it? And if they had this, why isn't he more valuable even just for genetic extraction than descending into Ohio in 95? So there is elements there that could make a really interesting story of how he got his powers, why he was there, and then why they just discorded him.
And which Captain America?
In prison knew him.
Which Captain America was he fighting in 1984 that he keeps blaming?
Exactly. Right. There's these nice little pieces they can put together into an interesting story.
They just in some way mentioned that was Bradley or something. That would have been such a nice callback to what happened in Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Well, Bradley was in prison at the time, so it wouldn't have been him either. That's why I'm trying to figure out who it was, because I think Bradley goes to prison in the late 50s. As far as the Winter Soldier says, that he was active in the early to mid 50s, and by the 60s he was in prison for 30 years.
I thought they said they pulled him out for select missions from time to time, but that's a totally different tangent. But
that might be true too.
Right there. Yeah,
it makes for an interesting story. And what I love about this is that, I mean, we've had a lot of Marvel world building that has gone off Earth. I mean, starting with Thor, we started reaching out to Asgard, and then Guardians of the Galaxy went all over the place. And so it's a very expansive universe, but so often I find that the stories on Earth aren't that globetrotting. Like it's very still kind of, centered on kind of our Avengers, who largely, I mean, we have Sokovia, I suppose, but otherwise it seems largely kind of US based. And so all of a sudden now it's like, okay, but now we've got these Soviets, and it's like starting to think about like, what other superheroes are here, and Wakanda obviously, but it's like, it's slowly starting to grow. And I'm liking this whole idea of potentially expanding on like this superhero arms race, as you were saying, Kyle, and getting more of these potential stories about, the conflicting global superpowers as they start working with these different superhero entities, and kind of what does that say, like when Captain America is facing off against the Red Guardian and things like that. So I want to see a lot more of that.
And eventually we'll get a crossover with The Boys on Amazon.
I was just thinking about that.
There was a
little darker though.
There was a reference to trying to find the genetic potential in infants, which to me just sounds like the X Factor. So I'm just thinking maybe there's some X-Men around the corner, which could add to this kind of arms race and trying to find those that have that potential.
Right, because that's brought up as far as how they find Natasha, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a pretty interesting story. I don't know if it was just me, but I kept waiting at the end when we saw her tombstone at the under the tree. I was like, is this the tree? Are we going to see Unknown next to her? Like in my head, I kept thinking that they were going to actually go there. They never quite did, but I kept thinking of that. It was an interesting story for, I thought, Natasha and her mother too, as far as like the way that played out, as far as, she had been essentially, as you just pointed out, she had actually been kind of harvested essentially and bought from her mother, who then, I don't know. I was very curious about that storyline. I guess I got all I wanted out of it, but the fact that her mom had basically sold her to this organization, and then it sounded like decided, I really want my kid after all, and doggedly was going after them, trying to get her child back. And then of course they put her down. I mean, any other thoughts from any of you as far as like other elements that we got from Natasha and like her childhood and those sorts of moments that stood out for you as things that worked really well or that you wanted more from?
I thought they dealt with that pretty well in terms of, I get a little tired of the parent story of like that it's the blood, it's the genetics, it's all, that's what makes a person different. Like this was getting rid of that entirely. There was even a deleted scene from Civil War where she talks about finding the graves of her parents, and they're just like, and then her talking to Captain America, and Captain America, they're like, "What did you find?" He's like, "Just 2 pieces of stone in the ground." Like it was nothing. And I like that they addressed it and then dismissed it. So it's like, it's because it's not about like who her mom was, who her dad was, like if it was, were they connected and that stuff. It was about her. And so it's like, even though there was a genetic thing, which that always weirds me out when they have, the reason she became fantastic is because of her genetics. Well, how about, can she just be awesome? Could that be it? So that when they sort of move away from that, I was glad, because then it's about the found family.
As a diehard Star Wars fan, I certainly have some thoughts about the idea that your genetics have to be perfect for you to be a hero. But
right?
Putting that aside,
as soon as they talked about that, I was like, "Oh, it's Rey! They're doing Rey all over again," and it started really pissing me off. And then they started moved away from it.
I love Rey. I just don't want her to have that parenting.
Yes,
but the other thing to me that really struck me, my all-time favorite superhero movie is Logan. And I'll say I'm not a comic book reader. I'm a dirty casual. I love the way Logan...
I knew there was a reason I liked you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. I love the way Logan captures that you can have like amazingly talented people doing amazing violence for the best of reasons, and it's still heartbreaking to watch. And the way that they have the child mutants in that movie, I promise when we get back to Black Widow, there's a scene where they do like violence against the most terrible of people, and it's both like, but it's not like rah rah go. It's chilling, because you're like, these are 8-year-olds. They shouldn't have to do this. That was the exact feeling I got, and I think one of my favorite scenes where Natasha's where the kids are helping with a getaway, and you're just like, these kids have combat skills that no one their age should have, and you're both like, yeah, cool, blue-haired girl, kick ass, and oh my god, what does that mean about you that you're kicking ass at that age, And that combined with some of the stuff about like, I knew the Christmas presents were empty, but I still wanted to open them. It was just, it gave me chills, and I thought that was such a great way of doing this whole like, both making like a fun superhero thing, but also like, these are child soldiers, and like, what does that mean? And I love when superhero stories can do that. So I just thought that scene especially was fantastic.
That was a powerful scene. For me, that really hit me. The fact that, she was looking at that photo album and looking at those and said, I knew they were empty. And it struck me at that moment. I'm like, God, yeah, the whole thing was fake. They were only there for 3 years. The fact that as kids with their parents, their faux parents, they actually changed clothes, did all these different poses and pictures, pretending like, oh, now this is Easter. Now it's Christmas. Now we're doing a Thanksgiving. Like, it's like shocking when you think about that, like getting your kids, I mean, I know that they have been, quote, trained or whatever. They've already started the programming process, but still, it's like, that's real. It kind of broke my brain a little bit, just thinking about how horrific it was, what was actually going on with these kids at such a young age. It's shocking, but it made for a really powerful scene, seeing how that played out. We're getting close to the hour mark here. Let's chat a little bit about the end of the film. It's a little bit of an Easter egg that we have, which interestingly was shot before Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This was meant to be the introduction of Valentina, the character that pops up there. I'm working with the new Cap after he's been fired and turns him into, I believe, the U.S. agent to work for them. And here we have her reveal that she's actually working with Yelena, and Yelena is one of her, or in her employ, and is tasked with the job to go after Craig Barton. How did all this play out for all of you as far as it's interesting. It works before, like I could have seen this leading into Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I could see it also from Falcon and the Winter Soldier to this. How did it all work for all of you? Craig, what'd you think? I
actually thought it worked better that it was we saw her in Falcon and Winter Soldier, because now we know what's going on. Because had it just been this, I was sure only the hardcore geeks, the clean readers,
not the casual dirty
casuals. No, the clean hardcores would have thought, oh, that's Madam Hydra, whatever. But I think that's great. But it also puts to the idea that people know way too much about what happened on another planet. She and Hawkeye were by themselves, and only Hawkeye would come back and tell the story. And it's not like he's going, hey, let me tell you a story. He's like walking in bars and telling everybody what's going on. I always found that kind of disturbing how much everyone knows. Because I think it was in the Falcon Winter Soldier. Everybody knows what happened with Thanos and Steve Rogers. When, it's like, how do you guys know all this stuff as a regular person? This would be covered up as best they could, and it would be conspiracy theorists who would be talking about it. They'd be right, but they would be considered nuts. But here, everybody, even the Eternals in the trailer that I saw right beforehand, know that Steve Rogers and Tony Stark are gone, and and that's fine. But I don't think everyone should know that Steve Rogers is gone. I think they all know that Tony Stark might have sacrificed himself, because I think people would want to tell that story and make sure people knew that this guy we thought was a selfish billionaire a-hole. That should get through censors, right? Is actually a unbelievable, selfless human being. But Captain America, who did all his stuff, who is Steve Rogers, is now gone. No one needs to know that. And it's just weird that so many people know so much about what went on off planet.
Well, he's on the moon, right?
Well, Steve Rogers lives on the moon. Yeah.
Well, but they know about Black Widow dying on Volmir or whatever.
That was an odd one, and I was like, I don't remember like the CGN news cameras like at the site of the end of Endgame. So,
but I can see where people would think that they were the last two people they saw together. Off they went. One came back, and that guy was Ronan, who was killing people all over the place. So they put one and one together and got three. They're wrong, but so I can see that. But again, it's just the average person, the street level person knows way too much about what's going on. And that just seems weird.
I agree with that. I like them putting Yelena on the path because she's going to be showing up in the Hawkeye series when it shows up. But I can't see any advantage to taking out Hawkeye. Like, what is the Contessa's plan? Like, of all the Avengers, why are you worried about Hawkeye? He lives on a farm. Like, what? I have no idea why she would take any time or resources to get rid of Hawkeye.
I have a thought on that.
Oh, okay, good.
I mean, this is comic book fan theory in every which way. But Hawkeye is a part of the Dark Avengers, a lot of the times. So maybe it's, prove yourself, and he'll end up actually being recruited onto that team. Maybe there's some, Hawkeye series where he ends up kind of betraying his daughter. I don't know. Just a thought that he doesn't actually die. He doesn't actually get caught. He doesn't actually he's not really a target. He's more of a target for recruitment. As more of like a Ronin kind of thing than actually take him out. Because I had that thought too. I was like, he's like retired and I guess is teaching his daughter a thing or two. Is that threatening? I guess I don't know.
I had a total roller coaster about that last scene because first of all, Natasha gets the graveside recognition she deserves that she didn't get in Endgame. Love that. Yelena going with Val, I love, especially because I didn't feel like Natasha ever was like, okay, well, now you're not red dusted. Let me kind of teach you how to maybe not be a murderer anymore. And so her going with Val at first, I was like that, but then Yelena wasn't rescued. Oh no, Yelena wasn't ever really fully rescued. Perfect. And then when literally she was like showing her the screen, I was like, don't make it be Hawkeye. Don't make it be Hawkeye. Don't, because it just felt to me like I love that we can come up with a reason for it, but it does feel like, oh, we're doing a Hawkeye show. Yelena's a cool character. How do we put Yelena in Hawkeye? Oh, let's have her want to kill Hawkeye. It just felt like the worst, like back with like Ultron level, like when Marvel was just having super contrivances just to be able to put one person in another show or movie. Again, I don't mean to be so negative or cynical, but just I was like, I love so much about that, but why? And maybe there's a plan. We'll find out later, but I just didn't love it.
Tune into Hawkeye to find out. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You'll get your answers. Yeah, but it is one of those things. It's like, I guess you just got to go along with it. But I do love what they did there. I liked that we had the little grave site and everything. I thought it was pretty effective. So, any last thoughts on this point or anything else with this film before we start wrapping up from any one of you?
There won't be a sequel.
Well,
if they do, it's going to be Florence Pugh. But I mean, Scarlett, I thought this was a good ending for her. It wrapped up all the loose ends that everyone was upset about with Infinity War or throughout the course of like I said, yes, it should have come out 4 years ago. It didn't, but we got it now. You can now literally just go watch that in between Civil War and Doctor Strange if you want, and you won't even feel a difference. But I think it was a very nice little ending for Scarlett Johansson's character and her being part of the MCU.
I want to give a quick shout out to the no small parts slam dunk that was Mason's character, or Mason, the character of Mason, played by I'm not going to pronounce his name right. O.T. Fagbenley. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, point is, he was great. I loved his character, and I really, this is one of the things that Marvel often gets right, is that characters with small parts are cast very well, written very well, and so that you really, really like them, and it adds to the entire experience of the movie.
I would 100% agree with that. When I saw the movie with Rob, who's my co-host on Marvel Movie Minute, and we walked out, that's the character he was most excited about. We walked out, he's like, who's that guy? Like, how did he get a Quinjet? Like, what's his story? Like, so already just a very small part with not even a necessarily a really strong comic book connection, but they did such a good job of casting and writing that it's like, what's that guy's story? Like, when's he going to show up again?
And that started all the way back with Iron Man. This is just a smart producerial, directorial choice. They've gotten the right creative talent to understand that, like, there are not throwaway parts. If someone's going to be on screen and talking, like, make them matter. And that's been something that's been pretty consistent across Marvel movies. And I want to give them kind of like a, hat tip for that stuff.
I certainly, after watching this, kind of walked out assuming that when we see any more of Yelena in the future, we likely will also see more of Mason. So maybe he'll also be popping up in Hawkeye. I'd kind of love that because he was fantastic. Any other last thoughts from you, CJ?
I love that if you go back and watch Avengers Infinity War, Black Widow is wearing the vest. It just makes me so happy. And I hope that we see Florence Pugh in the vest later. She got it back somehow. It's a cute little thing, and I like it.
Lots of pockets.
Also, when we see her in the glass cage, when she's actually Melina, she's in the same position she was when she fell from Volum, when she landed at the bottom of Volmar, when she's laying on the bed.
Oh, interesting.
In the cage. Yeah. I noticed that because the way her leg was crossed, the way it was they made exactly the same layout. So even though it wasn't her, it was Melina.
Deep cut.
Very nice. Speaking of weird things that reminded me of other things from other projects, when that helicopter falls from the sky, first of all, that was weirdly comical to the way that it just like fell. And
that was the moment that Jordan and the guy next to him they could not stop laughing.
For the record, the guy sitting next to me laughed way longer than I did. And I often am the guy who's laughing last in the theater, beyond when everyone else is like quieted down and is back to watching the movie and I'm still laughing loudly. It was that guy this time. Just want to get the record straight.
Well, I'm glad
there.
you did. I for me, the way that the copter landed, it was sitting there on the hill. Like, all I could think of was the Thanos copter that we had in Loki. Like, it was this, like, almost in the same position in the frame and everything. I'm like, is that weirdly supposed to be something? Because it just, I don't know. It struck my brain as a strange, if at all, reference from that particular show. But all right, Matthew, any last thoughts from you?
I so loved everything about her parents. Like, I wanted more of their story, but especially like him in the prison. Just as like that moment of him being the big fish in a small pond was so beautiful and hilarious. And also Ursa Major apparently could be a character, and he was listed as that in the caption, so that could be fun. But then the moment when he's like back with the person who, was his wife theoretically, but they were both spies. But seeing that there is some genuine warmth between the two of them, as a person who has a couple items in his closet who I am, if I keep eating right, will one day be able to fit into again, but can't right now. Like that scene of him, I was just like, oh God, I'm with you, my friend. Like when he couldn't fit in. But then the way that she was like, it's a little tight, but it still looks good. Like, I just like, there was so much warmth there, and just, it was just like, that one line told me everything I needed to know about how those two characters felt about each other. And I just thought that was like, as much as I want more, Marvel is very good at just giving you one or two sentences that perfectly tell you about two characters. And I thought I loved that.
My son got, who's young and juvenile, got a very big kick out of the line, "I've been in prison and I have a lot of energy." Long laugh. That was the same laugh that you had on your end there, Jordan. Jordan, any last thoughts from you on this one?
I think like some of the criticisms of this movie, I think have been really, really insightful. Particularly, Matthew, shout out to some of your ideas about what maybe could have been done to make this movie way more maybe deep and philosophically and engaging. But I do want to just in general, like my lasting impression of this movie is very, very positive. While I'm a little salty toward Marvel in general, I still will always show up and really appreciate like a very fine product. And Disney's really good at getting my money, and they always will be, I think. So, there are worse things.
They figured it out. Kyle, last thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how they sort of position Captain Marvel as being so strong women, strong, like, all that stuff. And yet I think Black Widow did the job better, and without making a big deal of it. I found this one much more emotionally resonant, much more interesting, and much more female dominated than the sort of first strongest female hero. It was interesting just to sort of compare and contrast. Yeah, I think it was a great time. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad Natasha finally got her due. I'm happy that they have found a new Black Widow, if that was where they're going for. If she's the White Widow, she's the Black Widow. That they've sort of handed the mantle off, and so I think if this is the last time we've seen the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, I think Scarlett Johannson can walk off into the sunset with her head held high, because I think it was a good way to go out.
Yeah. I think that they did a good job with this one. I had a lot of fun. I think I just loved seeing it being so female-centric. So weirdly, it's like F9, and now we have this. Like, what is it about family right now? It's like, I guess it's just very celebratory of like, it's all about the family. But I loved that. I really loved that we had such a strong family presence in this film. Well, all of you, thank you so much for joining me here to talk about Black Widow on the film board. I really appreciate it. Craig, do you have any plugs that you'd like to throw out to people?
Sure. We got Matinee Heroes, which is the main podcast where we talk and celebrate heroic cinema. So we do that every Saturday. And then we have a spin-off game show that we do on Tuesdays called The Cast Off. Because part of the segments, one of the segments we do for Matinee Heroes is we recast the movie that we're talking about. Not because we don't think they did a good job, it's just we just love actors so much and we'd like to see other people do other things. So we do the Cast Off on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, and at Comic-Cons near you. We'll be doing one in Houston live. We're doing 2 in Houston live, and we're going to be doing one in Salt Lake in September at FanX. So, and anybody else would like to. So matineeheroes.com.
Fantastic. Kyle, how about you?
Marvel Movie Minute Season 3 is up and rolling, so we are about halfway through Iron Man 2. So we jump in if you haven't gone it. We're having a good time talking about it in a minute-by-minute fashion. Also, we do a weekly recap show live on YouTube right here. If you're watching the live stream, it's here, or on the Next Reel YouTube page. That's around 11:30, and we go over whatever the Marvel news has come out, and then talk about Marvel Movie Minute, and then usually whatever, if it's Loki, if it's Captain America, Winter Soldier, whatever we're talking about, we get into it there too.
Awesome. CJ, do you have anything you want to plug, or any place you want people to follow you online or anything like that?
My online presence at the moment is limited, so I don't really have a whole lot of plugs. I was just happy to join and talk about a good movie.
It's happy to be here. Awesome. Jordan, how about you?
I actually do have a plug this week.
Hey, all right.
I work for a company called Himalaya, and if you download the Himalaya app, I've been producing these biographical stories. We release one a day for free. So it's a paid app with paid content, but they make one of these stories available for free every day. I think they're great. I'm biased. I make them, but anyway, so if people want to check them out, please do. And if you want to tell me what you think of them, you can hit me up on Twitter or whatever.
Where would they find you there?
I am not Jay Peterson on Twitter. So at not Jay Peterson with an O-N, because my name is spelled with an E-N. It's very complicated. Anyway,
it's like an in-joke. You got to understand it to really get it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Exactly.
I love it. All right, Matthew, where would you like to direct people for your show?
Sure. So, first of all, I apologies to those who just loved hearing about the popcornness and the great action. But if you don't mind the deep philosophical gazing on popcorn movies, my podcast Superhero Ethics is where we go into a lot of depth about that kind of stuff. We talk about anything that's in the kind of superhero, sci-fi, fantasy. We've done video games, role-playing games, the Magic the Gathering story. I'm not always so negative as I was today, and I apologize for being overly critical. Tomorrow night we're recording on Luca and Zaya and the Last Dragon, which we have fantastic things to say about. I love both of those. I love Black Widow in a lot of ways, but so definitely check that out. I also do a podcast called Star Wars Universe Podcast, which is a podcast for people who really love Star Wars, who don't like the toxicity of some of the fandom, and haven't memorized the names of all the different ships. And like it's much more about the kind of like the characters, the story, than it is diving very deep into the lore details. But we have a lot of fun with it, and you can check out both of those at theethicalpanda.com, or that's my kind of nom de plume on the internet, The Ethical Panda, and you can search for me on Twitter or Facebook under that same name.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to our July member bonus episode. I think we're actually going to be releasing it to the public, but members are going to be getting it first. And as for that, thank you all of our wonderful members for your support. For everybody, don't forget to join our online community with fellow movie lovers. You can learn more at thenextreel.com/discord. And if you are interested in supporting us to help keep the lights on and get some great benefits while you're at it, head to thenextreel.com/membership. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back in August. This is the end for this month. So until then, meeting adjourned.